The call came at 9:47 p.m., the night before my wedding. I was standing at the window of my hotel room in a white robe I'd barely pulled on after my shower, watching the Charlotte skyline blur through the glass. My dress was hanging in the closet, 7 months of searching, 3 fittings, ivory lace over crepe, the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned. The bouquet was being stored downstairs in the hotel refrigerator, everything was in place. Then my father's name lit up my phone screen. I smiled when I answered. I assumed it was a logistics question. What time should he arrive before the ceremony? Where should he park? Had I confirmed the caterer? I answered on the second ring. He didn't say hello. "There's a situation," he said. His voice was the voice he used when he was telling me something he'd already decided and didn't want a response. "I won't be giving the father of the bride speech tomorrow." I actually laughed. Just a short sound, more confusion than humor. I asked him what he meant. "Your stepbrother is having a hard week," he said. "He and Chandra filed the separation papers on Monday. Watching me stand up and celebrate your marriage is going to be very painful for him. Your stepmother thinks it's better if I just keep a low profile during the reception." I sat down on the edge of the bed. The air in the room felt different suddenly, thinner. Before I could say anything, my stepmother's voice came over the speaker. She'd been in the room with him. She'd been listening the whole time. "Layla, honey, it's just one speech," she said, using the soft, patient tone she reserved for moments when she'd already won. "Nobody's going to notice. You and Noah will be so caught up in each other anyway. Booker needs us right now. He's been devastated. The last thing he needs is to sit there watching your father celebrate you while his own marriage is falling apart." I held the phone and looked at the ivory dress hanging across the room. 29 years old. My wedding day was in 14 hours, and my father was pulling out because my stepbrother's feelings about his divorce were more important than the fact that I had one day, one, that was supposed to be about me. "I understand," I said. My voice was completely flat. "Don't worry about the speech." I ended the call before either of them could respond. Before you watch what happens next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when the people who were supposed to protect you refused to, hit like, because this one's for you. My name is Layla, I'm 29 years old, I grew up in Charlotte, and my mother died when I was 12, a car accident in February, a patch of black ice on I-85, and everything in my life divided into before and after in a single afternoon. She'd been a businesswoman, quiet and sharp, the kind of person who made things happen without requiring applause. She'd built a property management company with her business partner over 8 years. The company was modest, but it was steady. It paid mortgages and salaries and put food on tables, including ours. She left behind a will. She'd been careful about it. There was a trust established for me, money set aside for education and to be released to me at 25, and her half stake in the company was designated to go into that trust as well. Her partner, a man named Wendell, retained his half. Everything was documented. My father remarried 14 months after she died. Within 3 years, Wendell's name was gone from the company. My father had pressured him out, I later learned, threatened to claim that Wendell had mismanaged client accounts unless he signed over his interest quietly and walked away. Wendell didn't have the money to fight it. He signed. He disappeared from our lives. The trust for me never materialized. My father told me, when I was 15 and asked about it, that there had been administrative complications and that it was being handled. He said it with the certainty of a man who doesn't expect to be questioned. I was 15. I didn't push. Meanwhile, my stepmother and her son Booker moved into our house, and the center of gravity in my family shifted completely. Booker played travel baseball and my father drove him to tournaments on weekends. Booker got a car for his 16th birthday. When Booker got into a mid-tier college, my father took the whole family to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. When I got into Georgetown Law on a merit scholarship, my father sent a text that said, "Proud of you, let me know if you need anything." I left Charlotte at 18 and did not look back. At Georgetown, I discovered what had actually happened to my mother's estate. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. It was me, alone in the law library at 2 a.m. during my second year, reading a probate law textbook with a specific example that mapped almost perfectly onto my family's situation. I pulled my mother's will from the county records online that same night. I read it 3 times. What my father had done was not subtle if you knew what to look for. He'd absorbed the property company into a new LLC under his own name after pushing Wendell out. The trust for me had been technically established but never funded. The assets that were supposed to fund it had been quietly redirected. He'd filed amended probate documents 2 years after my mother's death that rerouted everything. A family court judge had signed off on it without scrutiny because there was no one representing my interests. I was the only heir who'd been cut out. I was 12 years old and there had been no one in that courtroom fighting for me. I sat with this knowledge for almost a year before I did anything. I finished my degree, I got my license. I took a position at a firm in DC that specialized in estate litigation, a polite term for recovering money that had been taken from people who couldn't protect themselves. Then I called Wendell. He was living in Asheville by then, running a small renovation business. He answered on the third ring, and when I told him who I was, Eleanor Sutton's daughter, he was quiet for a long time before he spoke. He told me he'd thought about calling me for years but never knew if he should. He told me he was sorry he hadn't been able to fight harder back then. I told him I wasn't calling because I wanted an apology. For 4 years after that, Wendell and I worked together. He had kept copies of everything he'd signed, stored in a fireproof box in his basement because some part of him had always known this day would come. I built the legal framework. My firm didn't know the personal connection. To them, it was an estate fraud case we'd taken on for a long-standing client. By the time my wedding was 2 weeks away, the case was fully filed with the Mecklenburg County Probate Court. The IRS had opened a parallel investigation into unreported income from the property company spanning 14 years. My father's primary LLC, the one built on what used to be my mother's business, had its operating accounts frozen pending the outcome. My father had no idea who had filed the complaint. He thought it was a random audit. He thought it was bad luck. I set my phone down on the hotel bedside table and sat in the quiet for a few minutes after he hung up. Then I picked it up and called Wendell. He answered immediately, even at nearly 10 at night. "He just called," I said. "He's not giving the speech." Wendell was quiet for a moment. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You know what this means," he said. "Yes." "You still want to move forward." I looked at my dress hanging across the room. I thought about my mother and a will she'd written carefully because she trusted the system to honor her wishes. "More than ever," I said. Wendell arrived at the hotel at 7 the next morning in a dark gray suit he'd had tailored for the occasion. He was 63 years old, broad-shouldered, with white at his temples, and the kind of stillness that comes from a person who has survived real things. When I opened the door and he saw me in my dress, his eyes went bright, and he pressed his lips together for a second before he composed himself. "Your mother would have been so proud," he said. I took his arm and I did not cry. I had been waiting for this day for a long time and I was not going to spend it in tears. The ceremony was at a historic church in downtown Charlotte. Tall arched windows, stone floors that echo. Noah was waiting at the altar, patient and steady, the man who had known about every part of this plan for 2 years and never once told me I was going too far. He was a real estate attorney himself, which had come in useful. My father was already seated in the front row when the music began. He was wearing a dark suit and holding my stepmother's hand. Booker sat beside her, red-eyed and sulking, already performing his grief for an audience that hadn't asked to witness it. I know what happened to my father's face when the church doors opened because 3 different guests described it to me afterward in almost identical terms. He'd been sitting straight, composed, the posture of a man who had made a decision and was comfortable with it. Then the music swelled and the doors opened, and he saw who was holding my arm. He went completely still. Wendell walked at an unhurried pace, his hand firm over mine, looking straight ahead with an expression of such quiet authority that the entire congregation seemed to lean forward at once. People who didn't know him sensed immediately that he was significant. People who had known my family for years did a slow double take, trying to place a face they hadn't seen in 17 years. My father's face did something complicated and terrible. The color drained out of it. He reached out and gripped my stepmother's arm without seeming to realize he'd done it. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the altar, on Noah's face, on the destination. But I knew. When Wendell placed my hand in Noah's, the pastor smiled and asked who gave this woman in marriage. "Her mother's family," Wendell said clearly. His voice carried to every corner of the church. My father flinched as if the words had struck him physically. There are things that happen at a wedding reception that nobody prepares you for. The speeches run long. The caterer forgets something. An uncle gets too comfortable at the open bar. I had prepared for all of those things. What I hadn't fully prepared for was how composed I would feel standing in the grand ballroom of the hotel, watching my stepbrother work the room like he was the one who'd just gotten married. Booker had decided that the best antidote to his divorce grief was to remind everyone of his success. He circulated through the cocktail hour telling anyone who'd listen about the rental property he and Chandra had purchased, still calling it theirs, even now, as if the words alone could undo the separation papers. He was loud about his car in the parking garage. He told my father's business associates he was considering branching into commercial real estate, a thing I'd heard him say for 4 years without evidence of it happening. My stepmother orbited him the way she always had, supplementing his stories with enthusiastic details, catching the eyes of her friends, and smiling the smile of a woman who is very satisfied with how the evening is going. And then Booker took the microphone. The DJ looked startled. The wedding coordinator moved toward the stage and then hesitated when she saw my stepmother nodding encouragingly. Booker tapped the mic twice, grinning at the crowd like a man who'd just done everyone a favor. "I know the official speeches are coming later," he said, "but I figured as the only brother in the room." He paused to let that register, the only brother, as if I should be grateful for the label after 20 years of being an afterthought in my own family. I should say a few words. Layla's done all right for herself, she's always done her own thing away from the family, and hey, good for her. But I want to raise a glass to what real family support looks like. To our parents who sacrificed everything. To my mother who has been the heart of our household for nearly 2 decades. And to my dad who built something from nothing. That's the legacy Layla's actually standing on, even if she doesn't always say it out loud. He raised his glass, my stepmother raised hers. Noah, standing beside me, kept his expression perfectly neutral. He leaned slightly toward me and said nothing, he just waited. I smoothed the front of my dress and walked toward the stage. I didn't take the microphone from my stepbrother's hand. I walked past him to the fixed podium on the other side of the stage and adjusted the mic until it was level with my mouth. The room quieted. "Thank you, Booker," I said. "That was very generous." He was still holding the wireless mic, his smile becoming uncertain at the edges. "He's right that tonight is about legacy," I continued. I was looking out at the room, 200 people, most of them my parents' friends and business contacts, people who had known my mother, people who had been at her funeral 17 years ago. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot. I want to take a minute to talk about what the legacy in this family actually looks like, because there's a version of it that hasn't been told in this room. My father shifted in his seat, something behind his eyes changed. "My mother started a property management company with her business partner in 1991, I said. "She built it for 8 years. When she died, she left clear legal instructions about what should happen to her share of that business. She established a trust for me. She trusted that the people she loved would honor her wishes." The room was very still. I nodded to Noah at the back. He pressed a single key on his laptop. The screen behind me lit up with a scanned document, the amended probate filing from 2009, 2 years after my mother's death. The one that redirected the trust assets into my father's personal LLC. His signature was at the bottom, large and unmistakable. "Her wishes were not honored," I said. My father stood up. He didn't speak yet, but he stood the way a person does when they believe their physical presence will change the situation. "The property management company that was supposed to be held in trust for me was quietly absorbed into a new LLC, I said. Her business partner was coerced into signing away his stake under threat of false professional accusations. The trust fund, $400,000, plus the accrued value of the business interest, was never distributed. I was 12 years old and there was no one in the probate court asking where my inheritance had gone." The next document appeared on screen. An IRS investigation notice dated 6 weeks earlier, 14 years of unreported income, frozen accounts. 3 weeks ago, I said, the Mecklenburg County Probate Court issued an order requiring a full accounting of my mother's estate. The IRS investigation is ongoing. My father's primary LLC has had its operating accounts frozen pending the outcome. My father's voice came from the center of the room, Layla, just my name, sharp and warning. I looked at him. "I'm almost done," I said pleasantly. "You don't understand what you're doing." He was walking toward the stage, trying to keep his voice low and controlled. "Those documents are out of context. There were estate debts, there were costs. If you had questions, you should have come to me directly. I did come to you, I said. I was 15, you told me it was being handled. He stopped at the base of the stage steps. I filed the probate complaint, I said, not an auditor, not a random agency inquiry, me. I am an estate litigation attorney, and I have been building this case for 4 years. Everything that is happening to your accounts right now is because I made it happen. Wendell stood up from the table near the front of the room. He didn't come to the stage, he simply stood, visible, so that my father could see him clearly. The last of the color left my father's face. His voice had gone hollow. He kept the documentation, I said. Everything you pressured him to sign, he kept copies for 17 years. Something cracked open in my father then. He wasn't a complicated villain in that moment. He was just a man who had made a series of choices over a long time, because no one had ever stopped him, and now someone had stopped him, and he didn't know what to do with that. He turned on the room like the crowd was the problem. This is a family matter, he said loudly. It is being weaponized against me in front of people who have no business. The IRS disagrees about what's private, Noah said from the back of the room. He picked up his briefcase and walked up the center aisle slowly with purpose. Booker had not moved from his spot on stage. He was holding the dead wireless microphone at his side, staring at the screen, at the probate documents, at the IRS letter. I watched him do the calculation in real time. The rental property in Dilworth that my father had gifted him 3 years ago, the property that had originally been part of my mother's business portfolio. His face went the color of old chalk. My stepmother pushed to the front of the room and grabbed my father's arm. She was saying something to him in a fierce, low voice. He wasn't hearing her. He looked at me. I built everything this family has, he said, and his voice was raw in a way I'd never heard from him before. I kept this family together after your mother died. I gave Booker a future. I gave you a home. You took what she left me, I said. I kept my voice even. She made a plan for me. She trusted you to honor it. You didn't. He started to speak again, something about legal fees and estate debts and complexities I didn't understand, and I stepped back from the microphone. I had said everything I needed to say. Noah set his briefcase on the edge of the stage and opened it. He began distributing copies of the court order to the 2 attorneys who were among our guests, friends of mine from law school who had agreed months ago to be present in case anything needed to be formally witnessed. Booker walked off the stage without speaking to anyone. He went straight to the exit and pushed through the doors without looking at his mother or my father. Chandra, seated at the family table, watched him go and did not stand up to follow. My stepmother found me near the doorway a few minutes later. She had composed herself into something that resembled dignity, but her hands were shaking. Everything we built was for this family, she said quietly, including you. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about being 15 and asking about my mother's trust, and being told it was being handled. I thought about being 18 and leaving the city with a scholarship and a suitcase, and the clear understanding that I was alone in a way these people would never acknowledge. You built it for your family, I said. I was a footnote. She opened her mouth and I shook my head just once. It was the first time in my life I had done that to her. She stopped, she sat down heavily in the nearest chair and said nothing else, and I walked away. The real reception happened an hour later, in a private room at a small Italian restaurant 4 blocks from the hotel. 30 people. My law school friends. Noah's family, who had driven from Philadelphia and pulled me into hugs that felt like being held upright. 3 colleagues from my firm. And Wendell, who sat at the head of the longest table and ordered the most expensive bottle on the menu without consulting the price. To Eleanor, he said when the glasses were full. We said her name together, all 30 of us, most of whom had never met her. I sat beside Noah and let myself feel, for the first time in years, like the weight was actually gone. Not lighter, gone. I hadn't known there was a difference until that evening. My mother had wanted something specific for me. She'd written it down. She'd signed it in front of witnesses and trusted the people she loved to make sure I received it. For 17 years, that simply had not happened, and I had been a child and then a teenager and then a young adult, with no resources to fight it. So I'd gone and built the resources myself. It had taken almost a decade. It had cost me years of keeping a careful secret from the people who were supposed to be my family. But she had planned for me. That was the part I kept coming back to. She had sat down and thought carefully about who I would become and what I would need, and she had planned for me. I had spent most of my life feeling invisible in my own house, like I took up space that would be better used by someone else, like the grief of losing her had been absorbed and redirected, and I had been left to carry mine alone. She had planned for me. The trust would be restored through the courts over the next 18 months. The process would be exhausting, and my father would fight it every step. Wendell would get his stake properly settled. The IRS would do what the IRS does. None of that would give me back the years. But I was sitting at a table full of people who had chosen to be there, and my husband was beside me, and Wendell was refilling glasses at the head of the table, and the city outside was continuing on, enormous and indifferent, full of people fighting their own quiet battles. I picked up my glass. Before I forget, I said, and everyone looked at me, thank you for being here, all of you. Not for the other part, though I appreciate that too. A few people laughed, just for this table. Noah covered my hand with his. Nobody ever tells you that the hardest part of coming from a toxic family isn't the confrontation. The confrontation, once you're ready, is almost easy. The hard part is everything before it. The years of learning to locate your own worth without anyone in your house reflecting it back to you. The years of building something real in the dark with no audience and no applause. I had built something real. My mother had planned for me, and I had honored her plan. And the people who had tried to make me small for 29 years were sitting somewhere across this city tonight, smaller than they'd ever imagined they could become, while I raised a glass to a woman they'd tried to erase. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything she'd intended.